I'm Charlie Smith, editor of the Georgia Straight, and I'm here with Andy Wilson, a member of the Haida Nation, and he's going to talk about residential day schools. He was a student in a residential day school in Haida, Gwaii, and I think it's a timely issue to address as Vancouver is getting ready to host the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Vancouver, September 19th to 21st. So Andy, maybe I'll start by asking about your background and your childhood and where you grew up.
Yeah, I'm born in Queen Charlotte City and was raised in Skidegate. I went to Indian Day School for kindergarten, grade 1, 2, and 3, and then grade 4 to grade 10 in Queen Charlotte City, grade 11 and 12 in Kamloops, and college in Victoria and Terrace, places like that.
And you also managed the Bill Reid Canoe. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I looked after it for about 20 years after working down in Gwaii as a watchman, and I decided that I did enough years down in Gwaii being a Haida Gwaii watchman. And I asked the people back home if they could use somebody to look after the canoes, and they said, yeah, can you clean up the area where the canoes at that time it was a canoe shed especially built for the Bill Reid canoe, the Lutaws, and the replica. And there were a lot of people coming in requesting to have a look at it, and there were a lot of documentary crews coming in that wanted to document the canoe itself. So my job was to keep it clean and keep the tourists informed about the canoe, and to bring the documentary crews out on the Lutaws. So that's what I did for approximately 20 years.
Yeah. Can you take me back to kindergarten, and what was it like when you went to kindergarten? You kind of grew up in this First Nations home, and then you're suddenly in a residential day school.
Yeah, it was kind of difficult because I up until going to kindergarten, I lived with my parents who spoke only Haida to each other, and they spoke Haida to my grandparents and great-grandparents in Haida. And once I went into kindergarten, it was really difficult to learn another language because I understood it quite a bit, because that's all I heard up until going into kindergarten, then having to learn the English language. And I remember it being really difficult because we weren't allowed to speak Haida, not even to mention a word in Haida. We weren't allowed to draw, we weren't allowed to sing or dance. We weren't allowed to talk about our legends. We weren't allowed to talk about anything to do with Haida culture.
And
So,
what were the consequences, say, when you're 5 or 6 years old, if you decide to speak the Haida language?
well, the first thing that would happen is they warned us right at the beginning that we're not allowed to do that.
And who's they?
The teachers there were United Church teachers that came into Skidegate and lived in Skidegate, and we had to learn the English language, and we had to go to the church there. So the consequence for speaking anything was to be whipped in the school with a strap, and if we didn't listen, then we would be, and if we carried on speaking any kind of Haida words, we would be whipped across the face, and if we weren't, if we didn't listen, then we would still be whipped across the back uh, on our backs or on our
Yeah. You can take a rest here, Andy. I don't mean to. I don't want to create, make you feel
yeah, it's kind
unpleasant.
of these kind of things we don't really talk about because it never comes up. We don't talk about that amongst ourselves, so there's no release for us for talking about that kind of stuff. But anyway, this was happening throughout my kindergarten, grade 1, 2, and 3, and when I went home to tell my parents about what had happened to me, they just told me I had to listen to what the teachers were doing, telling us not to speak Haida or say any words in the Haida. And we didn't know, or I didn't know, and most of us didn't know when you're that young why our parents weren't defending us. And we would find out later as we grew older that the consequences for them, if we didn't listen to what the teachers were saying, is that our parents would be arrested by the RCMP for us not listening to the teachers. And that was really difficult. And we didn't know until later also that our parents went to residential schools and the things that they went through in residential schools that they were sent to, which was far away from home. And I didn't know that until I got way older, like into my 20s, that what happened to my parents. And I didn't know what happened to my brothers also who got sent away to residential schools. So all that stuff coming together, and the fear of for my parents knowing the consequences of us not listening. And this was throughout, and as we got older, talking amongst each other, all the ones that went through that school system, that this was happening to everybody. It wasn't just me and my parents. It was all the people that I went to school with. Their parents went through this similar situation. And so there's that fear of what's going to happen if we didn't listen to the teachers. So that was a real strong driving force for our parents to tell us to listen, and wondering why they weren't defending us when these teachers were whipping us with these straps and these sticks.
Did they use the objects on your face?
A strap, yes.
Yeah.
And the whips would be used on our back. And so that's a real, once you get hit a couple times, you know not to say anything or do anything in Haida. So it has a lasting impact on you for the rest of your life. So,
what are the biggest misconceptions about students who went to the day schools or the day school experience?
well, I think that from what I'm hearing and from what I experience is that we didn't go through the same kind of things that the people in residential schools went through. Just because after the school day was over, we went back home, whereas the people in residential schools went to their dormitories. So I know that and just these last few months I've been asking other people about their experiences in residential schools and in the daycares or the day schools, what it was like for them, and it was just as traumatic for them as it was for me. And we And I was thinking about it the other day because we went to a First Nations school here in Vancouver, and I was thinking about is there anybody within my age group that speaks Haida? And it was really difficult for me to come up with one person that speaks Haida fluently. And I was trying to think about who I could call or talk to, who that person, if they spoke Haida or they understood Haida like I did before going into kindergarten and to the Indian day schools. And there was nobody I could think of that speaks it now. It seems like I have a mental block speaking it or understanding it. I could understand a little bit, but I remember a lot of stories from my great-grandparents and my grandparents telling me stories in Haida when I was really little, and there's still inklings of it that come out that I remember. And then as the years went on, I remember that I would visit my grandparents and great-grandparents, and having a translator talk to me about the stories they were trying to tell me. So I still wonder about all the other people that are the same age as me, who went through the school system at the same time as I did, what their experience is. But I don't think they're going to talk to me about it. I think it's too difficult yet.